Hello, my name is Cody Palmer. I'm 37 years old, and if you asked me what I've been through in this life, I'd say it's been like a rocky road, with a few brilliant moments mixed with wounds that never heal. I was born in a forgotten corner of New Jersey, where big dreams were often crushed under the weight of poverty and the harshness of life. But I never let my circumstances define me. And this story, it's not just about me, but about what I've fought to hold on to, and what I've lost. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Newark, where dilapidated houses crowded together as if fighting for a sliver of living space. My father was a plumber. My mother worked part-time at a grocery store. They didn't have much, but they had me. And they taught me that if I wanted to break free from the cycle of poverty, I had to stand up on my own. I studied like crazy. Long nights under the dim light of a small room hunched over books and numbers, I told myself, I'll make it. I'll get out. Accounting wasn't my dream, but it was my ticket to a better life. I excelled better than anyone in my class. When I graduated college with honors, I felt like I'd touched a star. Standing on the stage, looking out at the crowd, I thought this was the moment my parents would be proudest of. But deep down, I knew my journey was only beginning. Then I met Alexis Whitmore. My God, she was like something from another world, a world I'd only seen on TV. Golden blonde hair, a smile that lit up the room, and the way she spoke, confident but not arrogant, left me in awe. We met at a financial seminar in Philadelphia. I was there looking for a job. She was just passing through, representing Whitmore Holdings, the financial empire anyone in the industry looked up to. I didn't think I stood a chance, but fate had its own plans. An awkward conversation about balance sheets led to coffee, then dates, and eventually, love. Alexis wasn't just the woman I loved. She was the daughter of Clifford Whitmore, chairman of Whitmore Holdings, a man whose name was synonymous with power and wealth. When I proposed to her, I was so nervous I nearly dropped the inexpensive ring I'd saved up for a year to buy. But she said yes, and I thought I was the luckiest man alive. A few months after our wedding, Clifford called me into his office on the top floor of the Whitmore Holdings building in Philadelphia. I still remember the feeling of standing before that polished wooden door, my heart pounding like it might burst out of my chest. Clifford was a tall man, with silver hair and eyes sharp as a blade. He looked at me, not smiling, but not hostile either. "Cody," he said, his voice deep and commanding, "you've got talent. I see it. And because you're Alexis's husband, I want you close to the family. I'm offering you the role of CFO of Whitmore Holdings." I was stunned. CFO? Me, a guy from the slums, now the chief financial officer of one of the largest conglomerates in Pennsylvania? I wanted to scream, to run home and hug my parents, to tell the world I'd made it. But I just nodded, trying to stay composed, and said, "Thank you, sir. I'm deeply honored." I wasn't naive. I knew part of the reason I was chosen was because I was the son-in-law. But I also knew I was good enough to handle the job. I worked day and night, checking every number, analyzing every report, ensuring everything was clean and perfect. I wanted to prove I wasn't just Alexis Whitmore's husband. I was Cody Palmer, the man who rose from nothing. But not everyone in my wife's family saw it that way. The Whitmore family was a world completely alien to me. Their mansion in the Philadelphia suburbs was so vast I once got lost in it. Dinner parties with silver cutlery, expensive wine, and conversations about stocks, real estate, or yachts in Europe, it all overwhelmed me. I tried to fit in, but every time I opened my mouth, I could feel the judgmental stares. Estelle, my mother-in-law, was the worst. With her perfectly dyed blonde hair adorned with jeweled clips and a smile as cold as ice, she never said anything outright, but every word she spoke was like a dagger. "Cody, where did you grow up again? Newark, was it?" "Oh, it must be interesting," she'd say, her tone dripping with sarcasm, as if I'd crawled out of a landfill. I'd just smile, nod, and swallow the insult. Then there was Philip, Alexis's older brother, the eldest son of the Whitmore family. He ran the company's investment division, and from our first meeting he made it clear I didn't belong. tall, handsome, always in a perfectly tailored suit. Philip had a way of speaking that made you feel small. "Cody, you're doing well for someone from your background," he once said with a smirk. I knew he didn't like me. To Philip, I was an outsider, a poor guy who got lucky marrying his prestigious sister. Alexis was my anchor at first. On nights when I came home exhausted from the family's disdainful looks, she'd hold me and whisper, "Don't mind them. They're just not used to you yet." I believed her. I believed our love was strong enough to overcome anything. But sometimes even she hurt me without meaning to. Once during a family dinner, when Estelle asked about my upbringing in Newark, Alexis laughed and said, "Oh, Cody has some very rustic stories." Everyone laughed along, but I just wanted to disappear from the room. The CFO position was a dream, but also a burden. I worked like a madman, not just to prove myself, but to protect Whitmore Holdings' reputation. I scrutinized every contract, every report, every transaction. I wanted everything to be transparent, perfect. Clifford seemed pleased with me, at least in the early years. He'd call me into his office, pat my shoulder, and say, "You're doing great, Cody." I didn't choose wrong. In those moments, I felt like I belonged, even if just a little. But deep down, I knew I'd never truly be part of the Whitmore family. Every time I tried to talk business with Philip, he'd respond with curt, cold answers. Every time I tried to get close to Estelle, she'd find a way to remind me of my humble origins. And Alexis, I knew she still loved me, but I started to notice she never stood up for me against her family. She'd just stay silent, smile, and let me face those invisible daggers alone. I used to think I was the lucky one, but I didn't realize that sometimes luck is just a gilded trap. I began to feel lonely, even surrounded by the most powerful people. I missed the days in Newark, where despite the poverty, I had my parents and friends who'd share a beer and laugh late into the night. Here in the world of Whitmore Holdings, I was just an outsider with a fancy title. In the early years as CFO, I lived in the glow of recognition. Clifford, my father-in-law, would often call me into his office, pat my shoulder, and say things that made me believe I was doing right. "Cody, you're part of this family," he'd say, his eyes sharp but his tone warm, as if I truly belonged. I buried myself in work, checking every number, ensuring every financial report was flawless. I wanted to prove I was worthy, not just to Clifford, but to myself. But then things began to shift. It didn't come like a storm, but quietly, like a small crack in a wall spreading wider each day. One late afternoon, as the fiery sunset streamed through my office window, Clifford summoned me. He sat behind his massive oak desk, holding a stack of documents, his face calm but his eyes carrying something unfamiliar. "Cody," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "we need to adjust some figures in this quarter's report. The investors have high expectations and we need to meet them." I frowned, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "Adjust how, sir?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Clifford smiled, a smile I was beginning to realize was never genuine. "Just a bit of market confidence optimization, Cody. Bump up the projected profits by a few percentage points. Add a little creativity to the numbers. No one digs too deep." I took the documents he handed me, my heart starting to race. Back at my desk, I opened them. The numbers. They were wrong. Profits were inflated, investments overstated. I cross-checked the raw data, and the truth hit me like a punch to the face. This wasn't optimization. It was fraud. I wanted to believe Clifford was testing me, that he'd explain it was a mistake. But in the days that followed, the subtle requests kept coming. At a fundraising meeting, he asked me to present information I knew was less than transparent. "Cody, don't get into the details. Investors don't need to know everything," he said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Then he handed me internal loan contracts, asking for my approval. I read them and saw it immediately. They were fake. These loans didn't exist. just a way for Whitmore Holdings to flaunt phantom liquidity to shareholders. Each time I signed a document, my hand trembled. I felt like I was selling a piece of my soul. I told myself, just this once, just to keep the peace. But one time became another, and I began to see the horrifying truth. Whitmore Holdings wasn't just a financial conglomerate. It was a machine of deception, run by sophisticated minds and masked by a glossy facade. Fake reports, manipulated numbers, empty promises, all part of a massive Ponzi scheme disguised by wine-soaked galas and expensive suits. Clifford called it market confidence optimization. But I wasn't stupid. I knew I was being pulled into an ethical quagmire. Every night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling while listening to Alexis's steady breathing beside me, I asked myself, what am I doing? Is this right? I tried talking to Alexis. One evening, when she returned from a charity gala, I pulled her into the living room. "Alexis," I said, my voice shaking, "do you know what's happening at the company? These reports, they're not right. Your father's asking me to do dishonest things." I hoped she'd take my side, say she'd talked to Clifford, that she understood how much I was suffering. But Alexis just looked at me, her eyes colder than I expected. "Cody, don't make a big deal out of it. My father knows what he's doing. He built this company from nothing. Do you think you know better than him?" She turned away as if I'd said something absurd. I stood there, feeling like I'd been slapped. The woman I loved, the one I thought would always stand by me, was siding with her family, leaving me alone to face the storm. I started losing sleep. Every morning, looking in the mirror, I didn't recognize the man staring back. The Cody Palmer who once believed in honesty, who studied tirelessly to escape poverty, was now signing off on fraudulent documents. I wondered if my parents, who sacrificed everything to raise me, would still be proud of me. One day, while reviewing another report, one I knew was false, Philip walked into my office. He leaned against the door, arms crossed, smirking. "Cody, you look stressed. Is being CFO that tough?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. I wanted to stand up, yell in his face, tell him I knew what his family was doing. But I stayed silent, clenched my jaw, and kept working. I started finding ways to cope. I saved copies of the original documents, Clifford's emails, meeting notes. I didn't know what I'd do with them, but I felt compelled to keep evidence as a way to protect myself. Or maybe deep down, I hoped one day I'd find the courage to do the right thing. One evening, I drove out to the suburbs and stopped by a small river. I sat on the hood of my car, watching the water flow quietly under the moonlight. I thought about the days in Newark, when my dad and I would sit on the porch talking about big dreams. "Son," he'd said, "honesty is the one thing no one can take from you." But now, I felt like I was losing exactly that. I didn't know what to do. If I defied Clifford, I'd lose everything, my job, my family, the life I'd built. But if I kept going, I'd lose myself. I stood at a crossroads, one side honesty, the other my career and family happiness. For the first time in my life, I was afraid, not of what I could lose, but of what I was becoming. I went home and locked the copied documents in a small safe in my study. I didn't tell Alexis. I didn't tell anyone. But I knew sooner or later I'd have to face the truth. And when that time came, nothing could save me from the storm that was coming. The days that followed felt suffocating at Whitmore Holdings. It was as if I were walking on thin ice, each step threatening to shatter it. Every morning, stepping into the gleaming glass building, I caught colleagues averting their eyes. They still called me Mr. CFO, but their tone was cold, as if I were a shadow in the very company I was supposed to help run. I wondered if they knew what was happening, or if they were just following orders from someone higher up. Clifford maintained his friendly facade, but I noticed he was starting to keep his distance. Important meetings about investment strategies or budget allocations, things a CFO should be central to, were now happening without me. Once I stumbled across a meeting notice on a junior employee's calendar. When I asked my secretary about it, she stammered, "Oh, Mr. Palmer, I think it's just a small meeting." But I knew the truth. I was being sidelined, like a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. Philip, my brother-in-law, made me feel that contempt most acutely. In one of the rare meetings I was invited to, he stood before the room, presenting a new investment fund, and didn't glance my way once. When I tried to interject, asking about the funding source, he cut me off immediately. "Cody, let me handle this part. You just sign the reports." The room fell silent, a few eyes glancing at me, as if I'd just been slapped in front of everyone. I clenched my jaw, nodded, but inside I wanted to slam the table and scream that I wasn't his puppet. Alexis, the woman I loved, the one I thought would always be my anchor, was growing more distant by the day. She was often away from home, citing charity events or short business trips with the family. When I tried to ask, her responses were curt. "Don't worry, Cody. I'm just busy." But I knew better. I saw the way she looked at me, not with the love of our early days, but with disappointment, as if I'd done something wrong. One night when I tried to pull her aside to talk, she sighed and said, "Cody, you need to know your place. Don't make things more complicated." Her words were like a knife slicing through my self-respect. Our 15th wedding anniversary was approaching. I'd been planning for weeks, a romantic dinner at Alexis's favorite restaurant in downtown Philadelphia, where we'd had our first date. I wanted to remind her that, despite everything falling apart, we still had each other. I reserved a table, picked out an expensive bottle of wine, and even wrote a handwritten letter, something I hadn't done since the day I proposed. But that morning, Alexis walked into the room, phone in hand, and said in a flat tone, "Cody, I can't make it tonight. There's an emergency shareholder meeting. Dad needs me." I was stunned. "Shareholder meeting? Why wasn't I told?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She shrugged as if it wasn't my concern. "It's just internal business, Cody. You don't need to know." I stood there watching her leave, the letter in my pocket suddenly feeling like a lead weight. That evening I sat alone in our darkened apartment, the unopened bottle of wine on the table, the city lights flickering outside as if mocking me. I wondered if Alexis was really at a meeting or if she just wanted to avoid me. My heart ached, not just because our anniversary was ruined, but because I realized that, in the eyes of the Whitmore family, I was never truly one of them. I started to feel like a trapped animal surrounded by invisible bars. Every day at Whitmore Holdings, I faced Clifford's deceitful requests, Philip's contemptuous glares, and Alexis's cold silence. I had no one to confide in. I missed my parents, but they were back in Newark, and I didn't want to drag them into this mess. I needed someone who understood me, someone outside this glitzy, artificial world. That's when I called Sam, an old friend from high school. Sam was now an assistant state prosecutor, a tough but always honest man. We met at a small bar in the suburbs, where no one knew I was the CFO of Whitmore Holdings. Under the dim lights with soft jazz playing in the background, I poured out everything, the fake reports, the non-existent loan contracts, and how I was being pulled into an ethical quagmire I didn't know how to escape. "Cody, listen," Sam said, his voice low and serious. "What you're describing isn't just optimization, it's fraud. If you keep signing those documents, you could become an accomplice." My blood ran cold. "But if I stop, they'll destroy me, Sam. I'll lose everything, my job, my family, everything." Sam looked at me, his eyes full of empathy but also resolve. "You might lose everything, sure. But if you keep going, you'll lose yourself. Can you live with that?" Sam's words were a wake-up call. I knew he was right. But I also knew I wasn't brave enough to act yet. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to release the helplessness choking me. But I just sat there, gripping my beer, drowning in loneliness. When I got home that night, Alexis still wasn't back. I sat in my study, staring at the safe where I kept the copied documents. They were evidence, but also a burden. I wondered if I had the strength to confront Clifford, the Whitmore family, or the world I'd tried so hard to fit into. I thought about my days in Newark, when I was a kid who believed hard work and honesty would lead to a good life. Now I stood at a precipice with no way back. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself, Cody, you have to do something. Not for them, but for you. But I still didn't know what that was. All I knew was that in this world I was utterly alone. The days after my conversation with Sam, I tried to reclaim myself, but every step in the world of Whitmore Holdings felt like a blade slicing into my self-respect. I still went to the office, signed the reports, smiled when Clifford patted my shoulder, but inside, I felt like I was unraveling. Alexis grew more distant, our conversations reduced to curt questions and cold nods. I wanted to grab her hand, to ask if she still loved me, but every time I tried to speak, her gaze was like a wall, stopping me in my tracks. Then I heard the Whitmore family was planning a grand family reunion at their seaside mansion in Cape May. It was a lavish event where family, close friends, and key business partners gathered to strengthen ties and flaunt their wealth. I thought this could be my chance to mend things, not just with Alexis, but with her entire family. I wanted them to see me not as the poor guy or the freeloader, but as Cody Palmer, the man who worked hard to stand where I was. But one evening when I asked Alexis about the event, she gave me a strange look as if I'd asked something I shouldn't have. Cody, she said flatly, this is family business. You don't need to come. I was stunned, feeling like I'd been slapped. Family? I'm your husband, Alexis. Am I not part of the family? I tried to keep my voice steady, but my heart was pounding, my face flushed with heat. Alexis sighed and turned away as if I were exhausting her. You need to know your place, Cody. Don't make trouble. This isn't your place. Her words were like a sharp, cold dagger piercing my chest. I stood there as she left the room, and for the first time I wondered if our love was real or just an illusion I'd conjured up. But I couldn't give up, not because I still had hope for the Whitmores, but because I needed to do something to hold on to myself. I decided to attend the reunion, invited or not. I wanted to stand before them, not as the CFO or their son-in-law, but as Cody Palmer, the man who loved Alexis and believed in this family. I prepared carefully. An expensive bottle of wine I'd saved up to buy, and a small photo album filled with moments of me and Alexis, our wedding day, our trips, the times we laughed together. I hoped those memories would remind them, and Alexis, that I wasn't an outsider. I drove over 2 hours to Cape May. The Whitmore mansion sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, majestic like a palace. Luxury cars filled the driveway, lights spilled from the house, and the sound of music and laughter echoed in the air. I stood at the gate, clutching the wine and the album, my heart pounding. I told myself, just walk in, smile, and say a few words. They'll understand. They have to. But as I approached the gate, a security guard stopped me. Your name, sir? He asked, his tone rigid. I smiled, trying to project confidence. Cody Palmer. I'm Alexis Whitmore's husband. He glanced at me, then scanned the list in his hand. I don't see your name on the list, sir. My blood ran cold, but I pressed on. There must be a mistake. I'm family. Please call Alexis or Mr. Clifford. The guard disappeared inside, and minutes later I saw Estelle, my mother-in-law, striding out, followed by Clifford. Estelle wore a shimmering silk dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, but her eyes were ice cold. Clifford stood behind her, his expression unreadable, though I caught a glint of disdain in his gaze. Cody, Estelle said, her voice high and sharp, what are you doing here? You weren't invited. Her words were like a public slap, and I heard murmurs from the crowd gathering near the gate. I tried to stay calm, holding up the wine. I just wanted to celebrate with the family. I brought wine and some memories of me and Alexis. I thought... Estelle cut me off, her smile failing to mask her cruelty. Memories? Oh, Cody, you think you can bring a cheap bottle of wine and a few photos to buy your way in? You think you belong here? She stepped closer, her voice low but loud enough for those around to hear. You're just a poor kid from Newark, Cody. You got where you are by leeching off the Whitmores. Don't fool yourself into thinking you deserve to be here." My face burned as if the world were watching me crumble. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, punctuated by a few stifled laughs. I looked past Estelle and saw Alexis standing there, radiant in a red dress, looking like a queen. I hoped she'd step forward, say something to defend me, to remind them I was her husband. But she just stood there, her eyes averted, her lips pressed tightly together. Her silence hurt more than Estelle's insults. Clifford spoke up, his voice low but commanding. "Cody, go home. Don't make this worse." He turned, guiding Estelle back inside, and the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving me alone at the gate. I heard someone whisper, "How embarrassing," followed by another laugh. The wine bottle in my hand felt impossibly heavy. The photo album useless. My self-respect shattered, the pieces falling at my feet. I turned and walked back to my car, each step dragging the weight of the world on my shoulders. Sitting in the driver's seat, I glanced back at the mansion, its lights still sparkling, the music still echoing. But I knew I didn't belong there. I never had. I drove away, tears silently streaming down my face, not from the humiliation, but from the realization that the loyalty I'd sacrificed everything to protect never existed in the Whitmore's world. That night, I didn't return to the apartment I shared with Alexis. I drove to a small motel off the highway, where no one knew who I was. Sitting on the creaky bed, still clutching the wine bottle, I opened the photo album. The pictures of me and Alexis, her smile, our embrace on our wedding day, now felt like framed lies. I wondered if she had ever truly loved me or if I was just a pawn in her family's game. I thought about my days in Newark, when my parents taught me about honesty and honor. I thought about Sam, the friend who warned me about the quagmire I was trapped in. And I thought about myself, Cody Palmer, the man who once believed he could conquer the world, now just a failure betrayed by the family he'd joined. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time I felt a small spark ignite inside me. Not anger, but resolve. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't let them turn me into a coward. I had to do something, not just to save myself, but to prove I wasn't the person they thought I was. I set the wine bottle down, closed the album, and told myself, "This isn't the end, Cody. You still have a fight left in you." But I knew this battle wouldn't be easy, and the price I'd pay might be everything I had left. The morning after, I received a text from Alexis. "Cody, where are you? Lucas is asking for his dad." Lucas, my 10-year-old son with bright eyes and a smile that could melt away any sorrow. Lucas was the only reason I still clung to the fragments of this marriage. I replied briefly, "Got it. I'll be home soon." I didn't want Lucas to worry, didn't want him caught in the mess I was facing. I returned to Philadelphia that afternoon, my heart heavy. Stepping into the apartment, I saw Lucas sitting on the sofa, clutching a picture book about spaceships. He looked up, his face lighting up with a radiant smile. "Dad, where have you been so long?" I knelt down, hugged him, and tried to hide the pain inside. "Just visiting the old hometown, buddy. How are you doing?" Lucas chattered about school, about the science presentation he was preparing, and I listened, letting his clear, innocent voice fill the void in my heart. But that evening, as Lucas was getting ready for bed, he suddenly spoke, his voice hesitant. "Dad, yesterday I overheard Grandpa talking on the phone." I froze. "What did he say, son?" I asked, keeping my tone calm, though my heart was already racing. Lucas looked down, fidgeting with his fingers, as if he knew he was about to say something significant. He said, "If there's an investigation, you'd take the fall for everything. He said you signed all the papers so no one could touch him." He looked up, his wide eyes filled with worry. "Dad, what's an investigation? Did you do something wrong?" It felt like the ground collapsed beneath me. Lucas's innocent, unfiltered words hit me like a punch to the chest. I set down the glass of milk, knelt before him, and forced a calm expression. "No, buddy, I didn't do anything wrong. Don't worry, okay? Just focus on your presentation." I ruffled his hair, smiled, but inside I was trembling with anger and fear. After Lucas went to bed, I sank into a chair, my mind reeling. Clifford, the man I'd once respected, who'd pulled me up from nothing, was now setting me up as the sacrificial lamb. The documents I signed, the reports I approved, the emails I received, they were all a trap. I recalled the times Clifford called me into his office, his voice gentle but commanding. "Cody, just sign here. You don't need to worry about a thing." I remembered the meetings I was excluded from, Philip's contemptuous looks, Alexis's silence. It all made sense now. They didn't just look down on me. They were setting me up to take the fall. I stood and went to my study, opened the safe, and pulled out the stack of documents I'd kept. The falsified profit reports, the non-existent loan contracts, the emails from Clifford with his subtle instructions. I read through every line, every word, each one like a knife confirming the truth. I'd been betrayed, not just by Clifford, but by the entire Whitmore family. Alexis, the woman I loved, surely knew about this. Her silence at the reunion wasn't accidental. She'd chosen her family over me, leaving me alone to face the humiliation and this deadly trap. I began to question everything. Every look, every word, every moment I'd thought was genuine now felt like a performance. I thought about Alexis's avoidance, Philip's smirks, Estelle's poor kid jabs. They didn't just scorn my background, they scorned me as a person, and now they were ready to make me the scapegoat to protect their empire. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my study, the desk lamp casting light on the documents, as if challenging me. I thought of Lucas, of his clear eyes, asking if I'd done something wrong. I thought of my parents, who taught me that honesty was the one thing no one could take away. And I thought of Sam, the friend who warned me that continuing this path would cost me my soul. I realized I had nothing left to lose. My job, it was a trap. My family, they never saw me as one of them. My love, Alexis had chosen her family over me. But I still had Lucas, and I still had myself, or at least what was left of Cody Palmer, the man who once believed in justice and truth. I stood, a fire igniting in my chest. I couldn't let Clifford win. I couldn't let them make me the fall guy, letting them continue to deceive and ruin others' lives. I had to act, not for revenge, but to look in the mirror and recognize myself again. I grabbed a sheet of paper and wrote down my next steps. First, I'd review all the documents, gathering every piece of evidence I could. I'd contact Sam, get his advice on handling a Ponzi scheme like this. And most importantly, I'd protect Lucas, ensuring he wasn't swept up in this storm. I looked out the window, the city lights flickering in the darkness. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me standing. I knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, that I might lose everything. But I also knew that if I didn't act, I'd never forgive myself. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself, "Cody, it's time to stand up. Not for them, but for Lucas, and for you." The days following Lucas's words felt like walking a tightrope, each step potentially my last. His innocent but razor-sharp comment, "Grandpa said you'd take the fall for everything," echoed in my mind like a warning bell, reminding me that time was running out. I was no longer Cody Palmer, Chief Financial Officer of Whitmore Holdings, or Cody Palmer, husband of Alexis Whitmore. I was just Cody, a man fighting to reclaim himself. I planned carefully. I decided to confront Clifford, not to beg or negotiate, but to make him reveal himself. I knew he was arrogant, smug, and I would use that pride against him. But I also knew that if I failed, I'd lose everything. I thought of Lucas, his radiant smile, and told myself I couldn't let my son grow up with a cowardly father. That morning I walked into the Whitmore Holdings building with an odd mix of fear and relief. I wore my best suit, not to impress, but to remind myself I was still a man with dignity. In my pocket, a small recorder sat like a silent ally. I took a deep breath, pressed the elevator button, and headed straight to the top floor, where Clifford's office reigned. His secretary, a young woman with a forced smile, looked at me with surprise. "Mr. Palmer, Mr. Clifford is busy. Do you have an appointment?" I smiled, trying to stay calm. "No, but it's important. I'll wait." I sat in the hallway, hands clasped, feeling the recorder in my pocket like a reminder that there was no turning back. After a few minutes, the office door opened, and Clifford appeared. He was as imposing as ever, tall, silver-haired, with eyes sharp as a blade. "Cody," he said evenly, "come in." "What do you want?" I stepped into the expansive room with windows overlooking Philadelphia, and heard the door close behind me. I knew this was the moment of truth. I activated the recorder in my pocket, a quick and discreet motion, then sat across from Clifford's desk. He looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "You look tense, Cody. Something wrong?" I took a breath, steadying my voice, though my heart pounded. "Clifford, I want to talk about the reports we've been working on. The numbers. They're not right. I know you call it optimization, but we both know the truth. It's fraud. I want you to stop." Clifford leaned back in his chair, hands clasped, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Then he laughed, a low, chilling sound. "Fraud? That's a heavy word, Cody. This is business, don't you get it? We do what's necessary to keep investors confident. You think this company grew because of clean numbers?" He paused, looking at me like I was a naive child. "You signed everything, Cody. You're part of it. Don't play the saint now." My face burned, but I stayed calm, prodding him to keep talking about past deals. "I remember last quarter's report, Clifford. You asked me to inflate the projected profits by 12%. And those internal loan contracts, they don't exist, you know that. If the SEC investigates, what will they find?" I deliberately emphasized SEC, watching his reaction. Clifford didn't flinch. He stood, walked to the window, and gazed out at the city like a king surveying his domain. "You're worrying too much, Cody. The SEC, they'll only see what we want them to see. And if there's an investigation, guess who'll take the blame?" He turned, his eyes cutting like a knife. "You. Your name's on everything. Reports, contracts, emails. You're the CFO, Cody. You're the one responsible." His words hit like a sledgehammer. I thought of Lucas, his innocent remark, and realized he wasn't just threatening me. He'd planned this all along. I kept my voice steady, though my hand trembled in my pocket. "Clifford, I don't want to keep doing this. I'm not going to be part of it anymore. You need to stop, or you'll what?" Clifford interrupted, his voice low and commanding. He stepped closer, towering over me. "Who do you think you are, Cody? Without me, you'd be some nobody accountant from Newark. I lifted you up, and I can cast you out anytime. You owe me everything. Your job, your reputation, your power, your income, your fancy apartment, your beautiful wife, your smart kid, all because of me. You think you can fight me?" I was stunned, not by the threat, but by his audacity. He didn't see me as a son-in-law, as family. I was just a pawn, a tool to use and discard. I wanted to stand and scream in his face, but I knew I had to stay calm. The recorder was still running, and I needed him to say more, to admit more. "So what do you want me to do?" I asked, deliberately softening my voice as if I were giving in. "Keep signing? Keep covering for you? What if I don't?" Clifford laughed, a smug, triumphant sound. "You'll sign, Cody, because if you don't, you'll lose everything. Not just your job, but Alexis, Lucas, your home, your reputation. You'll be back in Newark, penniless, and no one will remember you. Choose, Cody, loyalty or stupidity." I bowed my head, pretending to consider, but inside I knew I had what I needed. The recording in my pocket captured it all. Clifford's admission of the fraudulent deals, his threats, his plan to pin the blame on me. I stood, looked him in the eye, and said, "I'll think about it, Clifford. But you should know I'm not as easy to control as you think." He smirked as if I were a pesky fly. "You know the way out, Cody. Don't make me repeat myself." I left the office, my steps steadier than I expected. As the elevator doors closed, I checked the recorder. The audio was clear, every word from Clifford like a bullet captured. I smiled, though my heart still raced. This was the first step, but I knew the real battle was just beginning. That night, I sat in my study replaying the recording, each of Clifford's words a knife reminding me of the betrayal. I thought of Alexis, her silence as I was humiliated, her choice to side with her family over me. I thought of Lucas, and I knew I had to keep going, not just to save myself, but to protect my son from this deceitful world. I locked the recorder in the safe with the other documents. I knew what I had to do next. Sam, my friend at the prosecutor's office, was the person I needed to see. But I also knew that once I took this path, there'd be no turning back. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself, "Cody, you've got the evidence. Now let justice do its work." The days following my confrontation with Clifford were a struggle to maintain a facade of normalcy. Inside, I was a volcano ready to erupt. Every time I saw Alexis, I wanted to scream, to demand why she betrayed me, why she left me alone in her family's trap. But I stayed silent. I knew my moment was coming, and I couldn't let emotions ruin everything. I contacted Sam on a drizzly morning, the Philadelphia sky as gray as my mood. "Sam, I need to meet you," I said, my voice hoarse over the phone. "It's serious." Sam didn't ask questions, only replied, "My office, 3 p.m. Bring everything you've got." His seriousness sparked a faint hope in me. Sam was the only person I could trust, the only one untouched by the Whitmore's deceitful world. I prepared meticulously. I copied all the documents and sealed them in an envelope, as if it were a bomb capable of destroying my world. Before leaving the apartment, I glanced at Lucas playing with his spaceship model in the living room. He looked up, flashing a bright smile. "Heading to work, Dad? Come back soon. I want to tell you about my science project." I hugged him tighter than usual and whispered, "I'll be back soon, buddy. I promise." But inside, I knew I was walking into a battle I might not return from unchanged. Sam's office was in an old, unpretentious building downtown, a stark contrast to the glitz of Whitmore Holdings, but it had an honesty I craved. Sam sat behind his desk, hair disheveled, glasses slipping down his nose, but his eyes sharp as a blade. "Talk to me, Cody," he said, cutting to the chase. "What kind of trouble are you in?" I placed the envelope on his desk, my hand trembling slightly. "This is everything, Sam. Proof that Whitmore Holdings is running a Ponzi scheme. Fake reports, fake contracts, and a recording of Clifford admitting it all. He plans to pin the blame on me if there's an investigation." I recounted everything. Clifford's subtle requests, the pressure to sign, Lucas's words, the humiliation at the family reunion. Sam listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. When I played the recording for him, I saw Sam's eyes narrow, his lips tightening. "Cody, this could bring down an empire," he said, his voice low but resolute. "But you need to understand. If I pass this to the SEC, everything changes. The company will be investigated, its stock will crash, and you could be caught in the crossfire. Are you sure you want to do this?" I looked at Sam, thinking of Lucas, my parents, the sleepless nights of guilt. "I'm sure," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I can't live with covering this up anymore, not for me, but for Lucas. I want my son to know his dad isn't a coward." Sam nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder. "All right, Cody, I'll get this to the SEC and make sure it's handled properly. But brace yourself, the Whitmores won't sit quietly when this blows up." I knew he was right. Clifford, Philip, and even Alexis, they'd do anything to protect their empire, even if it meant destroying me. Before leaving his office, I took one final step. I sent copies of all the evidence, documents, emails, the recording, to a lawyer Sam recommended and an investigative reporter I trusted from a major newspaper. I wasn't going to let Clifford turn the tables. If he wanted to play dirty, I'd play first. Days later, the news broke like a bomb. The SEC announced a public investigation into Whitmore Holdings for suspected large-scale financial fraud. The company's stock plummeted within hours, from its peak to a record low. News channels broadcast images of the Whitmore Holdings headquarters sealed off, employees coming and going with panicked faces. I sat in the apartment, watching the TV, feeling like I was witnessing another world collapse. But I wasn't happy. I just felt relieved, as if a massive weight had been lifted from my chest. Clifford was summoned for questioning. Philip, as expected, started spreading rumors that I, Cody Palmer, was behind the fake reports, that I'd abused my CFO position to manipulate finances. I read those accusations in an article, and once again I felt my blood boil. But I wasn't afraid. I'd sent the evidence to the media and the SEC before they could twist the truth. The recording of Clifford, with his smug voice and threats, appeared in a major article headlined, "Whitmore Holdings Chairman Admits Fraud in Secret Recording." I knew Clifford and Philip were trying to pin the blame on me, but they were too late. Justice, though slow, was starting to move. I sat in my study looking at the now empty safe and told myself, "You did it, Cody. You stood up." Chaos engulfed the Whitmore family. In the days following the SEC's investigation, their Cape May mansion became a media circus. Reporters camped outside, cameras trained on every door, as if waiting for a spectacular collapse. Clifford was placed under house arrest, awaiting formal charges. Philip appeared on television, attempting to salvage their image with shaky excuses, his eyes darting nervously. Estelle, the woman who once humiliated me in front of a crowd, now hid from the press, cowering in the mansion like a wounded animal. I wasn't surprised when Philip and his allies tried to pin the blame on me. They sent emails to shareholders, claiming I had acted alone, that I was the traitor who falsified reports for personal gain. But their lies unraveled quickly. The copies of documents and the recording I'd sent to the media and the SEC became my strongest weapons. News outlets repeatedly quoted Clifford, "You signed everything, Cody. You're the one responsible." Those words, once used to threaten me, now became the noose around his neck. One evening, I returned to the apartment after days of staying elsewhere. As I walked in, Alexis was sitting in the living room. When she saw me, she stood, her eyes brimming with tears. "Cody," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." Alexis, in that moment, no longer carried the haughty air of a Whitmore. "You don't understand, Cody. I didn't want things to turn out like this. Dad, he was just trying to protect the family. Can you stop this? Tell the SEC it was a misunderstanding. I'm begging you. For Lucas. For us." I looked at her, the woman I once loved more than life itself, and felt an emptiness where my heart once beat for her. "Alexis," I said, my voice eerily calm, "you stood by while they tried to destroy me. At the reunion, you stayed silent when your mother humiliated me. You knew your father planned to make me the scapegoat, and you said nothing. Now you're begging for your family, but you never stood up for me. Let justice take its course." Alexis burst into tears, stepping closer, her voice pleading. "Cody, I'm sorry. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose Lucas. Can't you see? We can fix this. Just tell them you were wrong, that you'll retract the evidence. We can go back to how things were." She grabbed my hand, but I gently pulled away, shaking my head. "How things were?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "Like when you let your mother call me a poor kid in front of everyone? Like when you knew your father was setting me up and stayed silent? Alexis, it's too late for regrets. You chose your family, and I chose the truth." Her face hardened, tears stopping as a flash of anger I'd never seen crossed her eyes. "So that's it, Cody," she snapped, her voice trembling with rage. "You think you're so noble? You think you can destroy my family and walk away like it's nothing? Get out of my house. Get out now." She pointed at the door, her face flushed, as if I were a stranger trespassing in her home. Lucas heard the shouting and ran downstairs, his wide eyes filled with fear. "Mom, Dad, don't fight!" he cried, his voice breaking. I stepped forward, hugged him, and tried to keep my tone steady. "Lucas, it's going to be okay. Come with Dad, all right?" Lucas nodded, gripping my hand tightly, but Alexis stepped between us, blocking me from our son. "No!" she shouted, her voice nearly breaking. "You're not taking Lucas. He's my son. You have no right." She pulled Lucas toward her, but he wrenched free, running to me. "I want to go with Dad," he sobbed, clinging to me. My heart ached, but I knew I couldn't let Alexis keep our son in that deceitful world. "Alexis," I said firmly, "I won't let Lucas grow up in a family that values money over truth. I'm taking him, and you can't stop me." I held Lucas's hand and walked to the door. Alexis screamed behind me, her voice cracking with rage and helplessness. "Cody, you'll regret this. You'll lose everything." But I didn't look back. I led Lucas out of the apartment, her sobs echoing behind the closed door. I took Lucas to a small motel in the suburbs. He sat on the bed, clutching his spaceship model, his eyes still red. "Dad, is Mom mad at me?" he asked, his voice tiny. I hugged him, whispering, "No, buddy. Mom's just sad. But I promise, I'll always be here for you." Lucas nodded, nestling into me, and I felt a fiercer resolve than ever. I would protect my son no matter the cost. In the weeks that followed, Whitmore Holdings collapsed entirely. The company was restructured, many employees were laid off, and Clifford faced a litany of fraud charges. Philip tried to dodge responsibility, but the evidence was overwhelming. Estelle, who once called me a poor kid, became a laughingstock in the press. The Whitmore family, once a symbol of power, was now a cautionary tale of greed and deceit. I decided to take Lucas back to Newark, to my parents' house. The old place was just as I remembered, creaky wooden floors and the smell of Mom's coffee brewing every morning. My parents welcomed us with tight hugs, asking few questions, but I knew they understood. "Son," my dad said one evening as we sat on the porch, "you did the right thing, no matter how hard it was. You held on to your honesty. I'm proud of you." His words were like medicine, healing wounds I thought would never mend. Lucas, my 10-year-old with bright eyes, was quieter than usual at first. I knew he missed his mom, missed the luxurious apartment in Philadelphia, but I tried to fill that void with love and sincerity. I took him fishing by the river near the house, taught him how to fix a bike, and shared stories of my own childhood here. Slowly, I saw Lucas's smile return, and each time he hugged me, I knew I'd made the right choice. While Lucas and I started a new life in Newark, Clifford, my father-in-law, remained under house arrest, awaiting trial. The news reported he rarely left the mansion, surrounded by lawyers and the whispers of the press. Philip, his once polished exterior now a shadow, was forced to resign and faced charges of complicity. Estelle no longer graced lavish galas, and Alexis, I heard nothing from her since the day I left the apartment with Lucas. I didn't know what she was doing, but I knew she was no longer part of my life. I sent divorce papers through my lawyer, along with a request for custody of Lucas. She didn't contest it, perhaps because she knew she'd lost. Those first months in Newark were a time for reflection. I spent hours alone, thinking about what had happened, the choices I'd made. Some nights I woke up sweating, haunted by dreams of Clifford's cold stare or Alexis's screams. But every morning, seeing Lucas run around the yard, I knew I'd chosen the right path. I was no longer the CFO of Whitmore Holdings, no longer Alexis Whitmore's husband. I was just Cody Palmer, a father, a son, and a man trying to rediscover himself. A year later, I decided to start over. I opened a small financial consulting office right in Newark, in a modest room on the town's main street. I called it Palmer Financial Solutions, simple, unpretentious, but mine. My philosophy was clear. Integrity is the #1 rule. I worked with small businesses, working-class families, people like the old me, those with little money but big dreams. I scrutinized every number, ensured everything was transparent, and turned away any client who wanted to optimize in Clifford's way. Every contract I signed, every report I sent, was a declaration that I was no longer anyone's pawn. The media began to notice me. One article dubbed me the CFO who stood up for the truth, and others followed. They wrote about my journey from a poor kid in Newark to the man who toppled a fraudulent financial empire. I didn't crave the spotlight, but I didn't shy away from interviews. I wanted my story to serve as a warning, a reminder that greed can destroy everything, and that honesty, though painful, is the only way to live true to oneself. One evening, as I sorted papers in my office, a young reporter called asking what advice I'd give to those facing injustice. I thought of the days I was pressured to sign fake reports, the nights I lay awake in torment, and I said, "Don't let anyone, no matter how powerful, force you to betray your conscience. Stand up, even if it means losing everything, because nothing is more valuable than who you are." I hung up and looked out the window, where the streetlights flickered in the dark. I thought of Lucas, sleeping in the small room at my parents' house. I thought of my parents, who taught me about honesty from a young age. And I thought of myself, the man who nearly lost everything chasing a glittering dream. One morning, Lucas and I walked along the river near the house. He dragged a stick, drawing circles in the dirt, and asked, "Dad, are you happy?" I knelt down, looked into his bright eyes, and smiled. "Yes, buddy. I'm happy because I have you, and because I did the right thing." As the sun rose, painting the river gold, I held Lucas's hand, feeling the freedom I'd traded everything to gain. I'd lost a glamorous life, a wife, a powerful family, but I'd found myself again, and I knew that was the greatest victory. "Sometimes, Lucas," I said, gazing at the horizon, "losing everything is the only way to reclaim yourself.